So as we continue our discussion on the Flashpoint storyline from DC Comics, what we do now is we pick up with the story of whatever happened to Hal Jordan. Now, this is actually, in my mind, one of the best stories, or one of the best, tie-ins to come out of the Flashpoint event. What we do is we're kind of fast-tracked, on this this history of Hal Jordan. Something that kind of amazed me about this is that this was actually written by Adam Schlagman. This was not written by Jeff Johns. And the reason why it kind of amazed me is because, Jeff Johns is the Hal Jordan guy. He's the Green Lantern guy. Whether or not he wants that to be his legacy, the fact remains that he did such a good job on the Green Lantern that those who are familiar with Hal Jordan's mythology really look at Jeff Johns as someone who's synonymous with the Green Lantern mythos. But what Adam Schlagman does is he sort of fast tracks a lot of the things that go on, and he basically sort of shows us the history of Hal Jordan in the sense that his father was a pilot, that he wanted to be a pilot because he looked up to his father. He met Carol at such a young age, that in the end, when his father died, it sort of shattered his life, and he ended up going to work, for Ferris Air Force Base under Carol Ferris, and he proved himself to be a very prodigious pilot. This is very much indicative of what we would expect to see with his character. The issue here is that once everything started to change, and once we ended up in a scenario where the Atlanteans and the Amazons started waging war against one another, then it stopped being an instance where, Hal Jordan was an experimental test pilot, and instead it started being an instance where he was basically training for military action. Now, he was not really part of ongoing military action per se, so much as it was always a background. It was always a backdrop. It was always, at some point in time, he will get caught up in the conflict in some form or fashion. Now, one of the things that Adam Schlagman does here is he throws a lot of the mythos of Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run in passing, even if it's not necessarily overt. For example, because both Carol and himself are fighter pilots, they are effectively partners, and her cover name or her code name is Sapphire, which of course is a homage to Jeff Johns' reformation of Carol Ferris as becoming one of the Star Sapphires in the Green Lantern reboot. And so what ends up happening here is, in the midst of this entire conflict, of course, he's attacked by Sharkman, and Sharkman is defeated, using the tactics of both Hal Jordan and himself Carol. But even then, it comes under scrutiny just because of the fact that they were using tactics that weren't necessarily approved by their superiors. But the fact remains here that in the midst of this conflict, once it's over, Hal Jordan is set upon by the arrival of Abin Sur. Now, this is where things change wildly, because in the regular DC mythos, Abin Sur had arrived on Earth and he was basically dying. And the result was that with his dying breath, he sent his ring forward to find a replacement. In Flashpoint, that does not happen. Instead, Hal Jordan actually saves the life of Abin Sur. And so the indication here is that Hal Jordan does not become a Green Lantern. Instead, Abin Sur, and this is actually covered in a tie-in, was sent here to the planet Earth for the purpose of finding the White Lantern Ring of Life, basically finding the White Lantern entity. And the idea was that Abin Sur was only going to be here temporarily. Instead, Abin Sur actually stayed here and became one of the heroes that fought alongside Cyborg to basically try to return things to a state of normalcy under the direction of the US government. And so while this happened, while Abin Sur went along and did his own thing as the Green Lantern on Earth, Hal Jordan ended up taking an indirect approach. And what I mean here is that while he was fighting, or at least observing alongside the US military, he was set upon by several Amazon forces. And because of this, because the situation seemed to be growing out of the control of the governments of the world, Hal Jordan was tasked with dropping the Green Arrow nuclear bomb on England, basically in an attempt to wipe out the Amazons, or at the very least to subvert their ability to continue a forward campaign. The problem with this is that Carol Ferris does not like this idea. Now, one thing I want you guys to also take note of here is that the two are very much in love with one another, but Hal Jordan hasn't quite popped the question. He hasn't quite brought himself to do that yet. And so, against the wishes of Carol Ferris and under the direction of President Barack Obama in this story, he is assigned the task of dropping this nuke. Now, he tries to talk to Carol one last time. He tries to communicate with her one last time, or at least to give her, his side of the opinion. But in the end, it results in a fight between the two of them. And so, while they are able to reconcile to a degree, it's not to the point where they make amends. It's not to the point where they are able to basically apologize appropriately. Now, this is a very big deal for Carol Ferris, and the reason why is that once they set their attack upon the Amazons and the forces are laid waste to in swift order, Hal Jordan drops the nuclear bomb, and when he does, he actually dies in the explosion. He dies in the process. And so while Carol is able to make it back, while Hal Jordan does give her his last goodbyes before he officially perishes, in her aftermath, in her grieving, she's met with a package that had belongings, for Hal Jordan. And as she goes through him, she finds a letter that he had written to her, which is actually something Adam had been covering over the course of the story, if you've been, following along with the various panels that we've seen. And the idea was basically Hal Jordan writing her a love letter, telling her that he loves her. He could just never really bring himself to say that he loved her, and could never bring himself to give her an engagement ring. And so she's kind of left dealing with this grief as best she can. And this is why Hal Jordan never became the Green Lantern, because he died bravely in a nuclear explosion in an attempt to wipe out the Amazons. Now, something I want to point out here, and this is one of the reasons why I was a little hesitant about doing the Hal Jordan story, is because it really coincides with this next part of the story that we're going to talk about. But it's also one of the reasons why I chose to do it now, simply because of the fact that with the Flashpoint story, the tie-ins, each of the three-part tie-ins sort of followed along with the main event itself. And the third story usually told what was happening in issues 4 and 5 of the Flashpoint event, leading up to this great big huge final battle that was going on. And so what we do here is we pick up with Shazam. We pick up in Fawcett City. Now again, Shazam, or at least I call him Shazam, is actually Captain Thunder in Flashpoint. Shazam is not just Billy Batson. Shazam is a culmination of kids, all of whom share some aspect of the Shazam power, and when they all say Shazam at the same time, they merge into a singular being. And the idea here is they're kind of unsure whether or not they should fight against Wonder Woman, and the president is on the camera, on TV right now, telling them that those individuals who are able to fight should fight, that the only way to hold off the Amazons and the Atlanteans is for what's left of humanity to rise up and fight as a singular group and take on these two forces and rid the world of them, because at this point in time, reason and logic doesn't stand a chance against them. There's really nothing they can do to go against the forces of both Wonder Woman and Aquaman. The only way to basically save the world is to get rid of both of their regimes in their entirety. And so what we do is, again, we switch over to Hal Jordan, and this again is of course, just the segment where it's showing us that Hal Jordan is gearing up to drop the nuclear bomb. Again, of course, we covered this a little bit earlier, but more so than that, we switch back to Metropolis. Now, this, of course, comes as fallout from Barry Allen and Thomas Wayne and Cyborg attempting to rescue Superman. But because Superman had basically taken off into the sun after seeing the sun for the very first time, they're really sort of left to their own devices. Now, they're not entirely powerless. Of course, Barry Allen has super speed, Cyborg has his different gadgets, and Thomas Wayne is very adept in terms of his ability to fight against them. The help here that they don't expect comes in the form of a girl named Emily Soong, but she's referred to as Element Woman. Now, this is interesting because Element Girl is more or less the same kind of character as Metamorpho. Now, Metamorpho is a long-running character in DC Comics. He's been around for quite some time, and he gained his, powers through mystical artifacts and so on and so forth. But the fact remains that he's able to change the shape, the structure of his body, to more or less manipulate his body for a multitude of different ways. Element Girl is the exact same way. She's an elemental, but she can manipulate her body based on a multitude of different substances. And so she's a very strong character. The problem here is that she's also insane. And this is actually something that Jeff Johns sort of gives us here. What he says is that she, according to Thomas Wayne, is absolutely nuts. She's really Harley Quinn-esque in terms of her level of insanity. Not necessarily that she's going nuts and wanting to kill people, but in the sense that she seems to be, well, for all intents and purposes, be a socially awkward person. And the result here is that she, when the president sent his message out telling people that they need to band together, they need to fight together as a singular team, she took that literally to mean that, she was going to be on a team with them. Now, they're not necessarily against it, and the reason why is because if they don't have Superman, they need whoever they can get. They need whoever they can rally to their side to fight against the forces of Aquaman and Wonder Woman. And so they basically end up bringing her along. But during this process, Barry Allen continues to have these glimpses, reformations of his memories from the way they used to be to the way things are, and he's continuing to lose himself. And so again, Thomas Wayne has brought along a series of injections that will help Barry Allen to fight along or fight against these, modifications to his memory. But again, this is just Jeff Johns telling us time is of the essence. And so what we do is we switch over back to the Shazam kids, and they're again continuing to debate whether or not they should get involved. But in the end, the idea here is that once Barry Allen, once Cyborg, once Batman, once Element Girl show up here, they basically tell them, you guys have to do something. They are wildly powerful powerful in terms of their abilities. But what Barry Allen also does is he shows them who they are from his timeline. In his reality, Billy Batson is the one kid who was Shazam. You know, not all the other kids that were there, it's simply just Billy Batson. More so than that, he had a Shazam family. In addition to that, he also fought Black Adam as one of his most notable villains, but at the same time, he was also an equal to Superman in terms of sheer strength, depending on what era of comics that we're talking about. But the legacy of Shazam, the legacy of Captain Marvel, is a very rich one and a very powerful one. And in his reality, in Barry Allen's home reality, the main DC universe that we're used to, Shazam wouldn't have stood idly by if there was a way for him to save the world. He would have done what he needed to do when it needed to be done. And so what we do is we switch over to a news broadcast which shows the fact that Hal Jordan has been killed in the nuclear explosion that we had talked about, where he is no longer, you know, part of the landscape. And this is a huge deal for Barry Allen because he didn't know where Hal Jordan was. He didn't know what was going on with Hal Jordan. But the fact remains that this is yet another casualty. And the case that they make here is that Hal Jordan was just a regular guy. He was a regular pilot willing to put his life on the line for the purpose of saving the world. The problem here is that Thomas Wayne doesn't necessarily agree with them. And Thomas Wayne makes the case that people, because of who they are, because of what they've done, they sort of deserve to die. He's willing to cast them aside. But in the eyes of Barry Allen, in the eyes of Cyborg, this is not okay. That everyone has to fight, that everyone has to do what they can to save the world, because even when it seems like all hope is lost in the face of such overwhelming odds, even when it seems like there's nothing they can do, that they have to do something. And so what happens is they grab the Shazam kids, they grab Thomas Wayne, they grab Element Girl, everybody they can find who's willing to fight, and they launch this sort of last-ditch effort on the shores of New Themyscira. They launch this last-ditch effort, you know, between the Atlanteans and the Amazons. And we have a full contingent of what we consider to be some of our most prominent heroes, some of our favorite heroes. But at the end, they're only able to do the best they can. They're only able to hold off things to a certain degree. Now with Shazam, something to point out here is that the forces of Wonder Woman and these guys didn't know that they were composed of kids. In their mind, Shazam was just a superhero. Now, the last time that Wonder Woman and Shazam fought, Wonder Woman came out on top. But when Enchantress shows up, she says they're just kids playing as grown-ups. And so what she does is she forces Shazam to return back to his form of kids. And this shows us how cruel the Amazons can be when they turn their swords against Billy Batson as a child and they kill Billy. Now, the reason why this matters is because the Shazam kids cannot become Shazam if one of them is dead. And so while this happens, while Barry Allen is watching all these events unfold, while he's watching absolute calamity takes place, he's met by Eobard Thawne. And Eobard Thawne simply says, "Look what you did." But with that being said, we are going to, actually, you know what? We're not going to bring this video to an end. My editor Gordon is going to be a fantastic editor, and he's going to put the other half of this story in here. So we're going to get to issue number 5 because I love cliffhangers, guys. You guys know I love cliffhangers, but I cannot leave things. I cannot leave you guys like this. I can't leave you guys hanging with this. So what happens is with Eobard Thawne here, and with forces of Wonder Woman and the forces of Aquaman and Cyborg and his forces all fighting one another, Jeff Johns begins to shift our focus. Our focus stops being on everything that's going on, and it starts to focus on Barry Allen and Eobard Thawne. And this is why I say this is like the continuation. This is the finale of Jeff Johns' run. This is where it all stops. You know, this is the end of his view on Barry Allen, because this brings us the final conflict, or at least what seems to be the final conflict between Eobard Thawne and Barry Allen. What happens is, from Barry Allen's perspective, Eobard Thawne screwed up the world. Eobard Thawne messed everything up. But there's also a little more to this. For those of you guys who had read Flash Rebirth, and I don't mean the current one, I mean the one from when Barry Allen first reappeared in the DC landscape after having died in Crisis on Infinite Earths, a lot of retconning was done there. But at the end of that story, Eobard Thawne seemed to be stuck in the Speed Force. It seemed as though he was trapped there and there was no way he was going to be able to escape. What we're told is that over the course of his existence in the Speed Force, he was always trying to find a way out. And Barry Allen was the one who engineered that. What Eobard Thawne tells us is that Barry Allen himself was the one who had screwed up the past. That Barry Allen himself was the one that had changed everything. That because Barry Allen always had this desire to save his mother's life, that because Barry Allen always had the desire to save Nora, that he had done that. He traveled into the past and he saved his mother's life. And when he did, he altered time, he altered reality. Now, because of the fact that there was no Flash, there came a point in the history of society when people needed someone who was super fast, when they needed someone, when there was just a pivotal moment when Barry Allen was needed. And because he wasn't there, things just began to take a downward spiral into absolute insanity, leading the universe to the way it is now. In addition to this, Eobard Thawne himself was quite literally anchored to Barry Allen. Because Eobard Thawne was obsessed with Barry Allen by virtue of the fact that Barry Allen was the Flash, and Eobard Thawne went into the past to meet Barry Allen and ended up driving himself insane when he learned he became a villain, the two were tied together. You know, Barry Allen became the Flash, which led to Eobard Thawne, which led to Eobard Thawne traveling into the past and ensuring his legacy by influencing the events that would lead to Barry Allen becoming the Flash. But because of the fact that Eobard Thawne was stuck in the Speed Force at the end of the Flash Rebirth story, when Barry Allen went into the past and saved his mom's life, the ramifications, the changes in the timeline did not affect Eobard Thawne, which effectively freed him from being tied to Barry, because what this did is it created a paradox. If Barry Allen never became the Flash, then how could Eobard Thawne have come into existence? And so because of this, Eobard Thawne was free to do what he wanted. He was free to travel throughout the multiverse, and he had done this the entire time. From the point at which this new universe was created, this new universe came into existence, Thawne just began traveling around. Thawne just began going around and analyzing everything, looking at everything, and being slightly entertained by what was happening. Now, while Thomas Wayne does intervene, while Thomas Wayne does try to help Barry Allen as best he can, he's totally outmatched. He's nowhere near the speed that he needs in order to defeat Eobard Thawne. But what happens is that things end pretty quick. In truth, it's really just Eobard Thawne's gloating that costs him everything. This is really the downfall of Thawne. It's the fact that he allows himself to be so arrogant. It's the fact that he allows himself to get caught up in his successes that he doesn't even take the time to consider that he might fail. And so while he's gloating, while he's towering over Barry Allen, while he's making fun of him, while he's relishing in his success, Thomas Wayne sneaks up behind him and stabs him through the chest with a sword. Thus ends the legacy of Eobard Thawne. And so what happens here is, while all these forces are fighting one another, the resistance shows in. Grifter makes his appearance known by fighting against, you know, the forces of Aquaman and Wonder Woman and so on and so forth. But while all this happens, suddenly Superman makes his appearance known. Now, again, this is not the Superman that we're used to. This is not the Superman that we know, but he does have all the same power that he did. And the reason why is because when he took off, he basically just spent his time drinking in the energies of the sun, drinking in all that solar radiation. And so while he's not physically buff, he's every ounce as strong as we would expect him to be. And he shows it when he single-handedly takes out both Aquaman and Wonder Woman. Now, initially, it seems as though he's on the verge of destroying them. He's going to wipe them out. But as things begin to change, as reality begins to reach a point whereby it seems like all life is going to destroy itself, Barry Allen comes to the realization that because he's the cause of this, because he's the one that screwed up reality, he has to go back in time and he has to change it. He literally has to go let his mother die. He has to let her go. And so Thomas Wayne gives him a letter to give to his son Bruce, assuming everything goes back to normal. And Barry Allen starts running as fast as he can to the point where he breaks the time stream. And when he gets back, when he goes, he ends up running into his mom, but he has to go back even further. And he basically keeps reliving all these different memories. Now, he does visit her. He does tell her that he has to set things back to normal. He does tell her that he's going to have to let her go, that she'll die, and she says it's okay because she'll be with his father. But as he continues running, as he keeps running back as far as he can, he eventually encounters himself. He encounters him going back in time and saving his mother's life. And so I know it seems a little confusing. I know it seems a little weird, but this is where DC's reset, this is where DC's reboot comes into play when they launched the New 52. What they did is they basically introduced a character named Pandora. Now, we don't really need to go into her wildly, but what happened here is with the actions of Barry Allen, because he had gone back and changed the past, when he goes back a second time and allows his mother to die, this creates a whole new universe. And it basically just allowed DC to grab their Wildstorm, to grab their Vertigo, to grab their main DC timeline, to grab all these different versions of their characters and mold them into a singular reality, which gave birth to the creation of the New 52 timeline. And so what this does is this sets things back. It sets Barry back to the moment when he first woke up. And of course, as he comes to, he realizes that the Flashpoint universe had happened. He realizes everything that took place, but he also realizes that things are now back to normal. And so what he does is he races back to the Batcave, to Bruce Wayne. And initially he's a little confused. He actually asks, "Are you Bruce Wayne?" And Bruce says, "Yes, of course." And he tells him everything that happened, and he gives him a letter to Bruce written from his father. And for the first time that I've ever seen in the history of DC Comics, Bruce Wayne actually cries, because for him, this is a huge thing. To be able to have some measure of information from his father is a huge deal, but more so than that, because Barry had talked to Thomas Wayne while he was in that universe and told him what Bruce Wayne became, it was a way for Bruce Wayne to know that his father was proud of him, that his father was proud of everything he had done, everything he had accomplished, that he was able to restore normal, he was able to avenge them without killing people, without reverting to such a gruesome person the way that Thomas Wayne had done. And so anyway, that brings an end to the Flashpoint story. If you guys enjoyed this, let me know, because I gotta tell you, Flashpoint is probably one of the best damn stories DC's had in a long time. Even now with DC Rebirth, Flashpoint still stands the test of time as one of the best stories they've ever done. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Drop a like if you enjoyed this, and yeah, I will catch you guys later. Peace.